For a day and a half, we've been listening to some of the most fascinating stories from around the world. Authors, academics, and performers have shared the stage to bring alive for us the true meaning of mythology. And they've, helped us see just how diverse this legacy we have. It's not just diverse, it's shared. So it's something that it's really, it's been a matter of great pride for us to be able to do this and host this for 2 days. And this one, it is this panel that is on the mythological stage, the next panel that we have brought together is something that we are particularly proud of, because it just tells us how this ancient world of stories was actually meant to be seen. Was meant to be seen as an interactive and vibrant space, not buried inside these books and libraries as it has tended to be largely. And that's why for us, this panel is a special one. It's called Stories in Action, How Ancient Storytelling Traditions Have Helped Preserve Myths and Folklore. This is our next discussion, and we have lined up, and the panel that we have lined up for you is a stellar one. And our moderator, I will tell you a little bit about our moderator and then leave it to her to introduce the panel to you. So our moderator is Radharani Mitra. She is someone who has been deeply engaged with the process of storytelling and contextualizing the folk traditions to a modern and contemporary ethic for almost all her working life. It is with a sense of pride that again we invite her to moderate this panel. And she has, Radharani has been a storyteller for over 3 decades now. And in her years in advertising and now as Global Creative Advisor at BBC Media Action, BBC's independent international charity, she does that with great ease and elan. She tells stories using new and legacy media platforms through 30-second adverts to half-hour TV drama episodes, through 180 characters on social media to mobile apps, all of this to change how people think, feel, and act. Welcome, Radharani, to moderate this panel. And with that, we hand this over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Arundhati. Now I'm really under a lot of pressure to be asking questions of this fabulous panel that you've put together. As Arundhati said, storytelling in action is what this panel is all about. Now we all know, all of us who are listening in and watching this session, that the arts in the world of myth, folktale and legend have had a long-standing symbiotic relationship. For example, the most popular and clear understanding of this two-way bond is the Ramayana, right? But how did this story become so deeply entrenched in our beings? How does it continue to capture our imagination and have such a strong hold on our psyche? It's primarily because this story was sung, it was recited, dramatized, and danced to, that it found a home wherever it went, whichever corner of India. I just wanted to tell you something which is very, very relevant to storytelling in action. And I just wanted to cite a really interesting and odd example from my own work. Now, I've been working on urban sanitation for the past year and a half. And although this entire country has been talking about sanitation, if you ask people what happens to their poo after they flush, you'll be met with a blank expression. So we really needed to educate our audiences about what happens to fecal waste, how is it harmful, and therefore what do they need to know, what do they need to believe in, and how do they need to act. And therefore we dipped right back into the past and we ended up creating a whole new asura. So we dipped into Indian mythology, and I have to say that J.K. Rowling and Harry Potter and the big huge serpent also was playing somewhere in our collective psyche when we sat down, brainstormed, and came up with this idea. And we created a whole new asura. And the central character of our campaign on fecal waste management, fecal sludge management as it's called, is Malasura, Mal Asur. Now, every time we, talk about Malasur, we draw a lot of smiles and people listen more intently. And that's the power of creating a character, a mythological character, or something that has been inspired by mythology. We have a stellar panel, as Arundhati said. Just a couple of words about each of them. I'll begin with Nalini Ramachandran. She is the writer and author of several books. Nalini has been working closely around the ancient art of storytelling, and her book, Lore of the Land, Storytelling Traditions of India, is a fabulous book. And as we were discussing just a little while back, Nalini has really managed to pack so much into this book and tells the story so compellingly. She also engages with the subject in her writings regularly, and her latest book is Navadurga, The Nine Forms of the Goddess. Next, we have is Vikram Sridhar. Vikram apparently is he just keeps surprising people with the things he does in his performances, because Vikram is a unique performer. He's a performance storyteller and a theatre practitioner. In fact, I've been warned by Arundhati that Vikram might just do anything during this panel, but Vikram, I'm equal to the task, and I'm not afraid of what surprises you may spring on us. Vikram uses stories to explore our rich, diverse, and complex heritage. He's an engineering and management graduate. He has helped people entranced with his storytelling across the country and has curated literature-based festivals for children. And that really endeared Vikram to my heart, because I love anything that's done for kids. Next up is Shilpa Modvi, founder of the Urban Folk Project. She's reviving the tradition of Yogappas, a transgender community that performs an ancient story about Renuka, Jamadagni, and Parasuram. And Shilpa, I've been told by Arundhati that you are setting up a center in Gulbarga. I have childhood links with that town, and we'll talk about it later. So let's start without much further ado. This wonderful panel that we have. So we have two performers, Nalini, who documents different storytelling traditions. And the one thing that I'd like to really say over here is that performing arts is one thing, but there are so many things my three panelists have combined, from puppetry to embroidery to sculpture and pottery, to name a few more. The question, and this is a common question for all three of them, that I'd like to ask of all three, is how do they see the relationship between the performances and art forms that are practiced and the world of ancient stories? So what is the link between the world of ancient stories and the performances that are happening now? Is it like say a one-way relationship where art is drawing upon the stories or as an inspiration, or do you see it as a two-way traffic where the performers and the forms of performance, be it drama, song, dance, whatever, also influence the stories and create something new? So really want you to delve into the symbiotic relationship between the two. And shall we then start with Nalini, please? Nalini, over to you.
Thank you so much. So I think it is obviously a symbiotic relationship, because neither art, performance, nor storytelling can survive in any kind of isolation. You know, it obviously needs the other to move ahead. And I think we do know the obvious things, that for hundreds and thousands of years we have been telling extremely ancient tales. This has happened because of either repetition, oral storytelling traditions, or because it has become a way of our life, you know. So we have just adopted these as customs or traditions or festivals. Some of them have also become a very inseparable part of occupations. So I think that is one reason why they have survived for such a long time. But I would like to show you a few examples where the medium has played a larger role. So right. If you could just, let me share the screen, I could do that.
Yeah,
just
please,
a second.
Yes.
Right. Yes. So, okay. So this is Kerala mural art. It's a temple art form, but what I'm going to show you is something called Talapatta Chitra. As you can see right in the corner, there is this storyteller or artist who is using a particular kind of metal pen or tool, and he's engraving on something that looks like paper, but it's not paper. It is dried palm leaf. So what you can see as the framework for this image are the stories that are told. Talapatta Chitra belongs to Odisha. That's where it comes from. And this particular art form actually gets its name from the material that has been used. So Tala means palm, patta or patta is leaf, and chitra is paintings or art. So palm leaves have always been seen as, you know, one of the most endurable materials. So I think that is an important art form. And the second one here, you were just talking about Ramayana. So I think this is something that mixes a lot of these combinations. So there is music and dance, and there is puppetry, and it's considered to be the predecessor of television, animation, and even special effects to a very large extent. It is an art form that is called Tolu Gomalata from Andhra Pradesh. A lot of other South Indian and even Eastern states have, similar storytelling traditions, but all of them have different names, and they have their own versions of not just Ramayana, but a lot of other stories as well. Again, here the material that the storytellers of ancient times have chosen is leather or hide, and it's processed leather. It just shows the foresight of these people. They may or may not have gone to formal education institutes or academic institutes like any of us, but you can see how they have an idea of how far the light should be kept so that the image has to be very clear onto the other side where the audience is sitting. And earlier they used to, of course, use mud lamps. Now they use bulbs because we've suddenly become a little more modern. But so that is again, and they also use black cloths around, so that the light is not going to filter out. It's all contained inside. So I think storytelling traditions, performance, stories, all of it is very interconnected, not just because of the material, but also because of the knowledge or information that they have been passing on from generation to generation. And so it's been inseparable. And again, the stories keep on being told again and again because of the material as well. Tolu, again, it means hide or leather, and Gomalata is dance of the puppet, so it means dance of the leather puppets. So that is what I would say.
Right. Thanks. Thank you, Nalini. Should we have Vikram go next? Vikram?
Sure.
Over to you.
So art is something that evolves over time. I mean, there is no reference on timeline to say this was 1,000 years back, and so it's constantly changing. And art has always been this edutainment medium, which has carried something that from one generation to hand it over to the next with the delta of change. Change has always been constant while transferring it. And so art becomes this bowl that we transfer. And a lot of times we hold on to the bowl and forget what's inside. So this stories have been human. They say the shortest distance between two humans is a story, and we love to listen. I mean, over time, as much as we talk, our way of listening is very different to the way we talk. And so art evolved as a medium, combining the two, where we could find the best connect between humans. I mean, where we say there's no laws in communication. And art in that way evolved based on spaces, culture, elements of the land, which is what it evolved into. I mean, and stories, because we're all sensorial people, stories are sensorial, we're all sensorial. And today we only use audio visual, but we've lost the rest of the senses. And arts, if you look at our childhood days to now itself, we'll see the change. And this bowl that is transferred has changed and will keep changing. And even what we call any form wouldn't be the same even 50 years back. I mean, it's just so change has always been there. And stories are the way that humans have documented a lot of things. I'm saying documentation, especially in a land where writing is a very, very, very recent phenomenon. So we've always documented through stories, our memories, our psychology, our emotions, our agonies, our heritage. I mean, our families, stories, and everything has been storified and given to somebody, to the next generation. How do we take it and how do we transfer it is what we see today.
Right, thanks. That's lovely. One of the things that I've always believed in that, there's a great deal of distinction between just passing on information and designing, shaping communication. And I believe that even if there is no call to action, as they say nowadays, or there is no element of interactivity, any form of storytelling is actually interactive, and any form of storytelling is communication. I think back to all our grandmothers and aunts, the raconteurs in the family who were telling stories, and how they'd actually build on the story depending on how you reacted, right? Yeah, lovely. So next up, Shilpa.
Yes, like you were just saying, quite often it's the stories that keep on evolving through the oral tradition, right? Through performance, I see that an actor, especially within folk theatre or folk ritual, acts as a medium between this magical, mythical world and our world. Like a Teyam or a Bhutakola, where the actor disappears completely into the costume and becomes spirit. Yeah. So we're walking in folk theatre. I see that the performer has so much agency to make the story contemporary again and again and again. Like in Yellamanata, there is a lot of comedy because it's a 6-hour play or a 10-hour play sometimes. So you have to hold the audience in. So there's a ton of laughing. And the actors are constantly improvising in a direction where you constantly think, is this a part of the myth or is this what the actor is doing on that particular day? So there is a scene where Renuka is giving birth to Parshurama, and Parshurama is such a Puritan even before he's born. He's like, I don't want to come down your vagina. I'm going to break your back and I'm going to jump over your head and turn up. And so she's like, oh no, what's going to happen? So there is a Jogati, a transgender woman who's sitting with her knees up. And she takes this plastic doll and she chucks it from above, or chucks it from her sari. And it comes and falls. And the other actor who appears on stage is a woman who is hearing Renuka cry. So he turns up and he picks up this child and he says, my God, Renuka, you've given birth to a baby who's come from a mall. Or has your stomach or your womb become a mall? Somar something, a Monday market. Is your womb, does your womb have this Monday market inside? This baby has come completely prepared. And you're seeing this baby, which is bought like this plastic doll from like a shop with blonde hair and camouflage, an army suit. It's a strange Parshurama, but he fits it into context. And you're wondering if the myth actually refers to a baby that came out dressed, right? So I think actors become those people who kind of live in the margins, especially within the villages. The actor is not someone who's coming from a place of questioning, but coming from a place of being marginalized. So he is actually more sensitive to what's happening in the village, and he picks it up and he introduces it into the story. So for me, the myth is not actually coming from so many, it can't be placed in time, because every year, every disaster, every major event kind of gets introduced into the story in one way or the other. And the actor does that. The performance does that. The person who paints, puts it down on paper and visualizes Lakshmi does that. From where we go from Lajja Gauri, who's just a vagina and legs, to Lakshmi, who's beautiful and she has lotuses in her hands. That happens through the act of pinning it down, the act of performing it, or the act of, turning it into art. So I think they're all symbiotic. And the people who perform and the artists kind of line this in between world,
Right.
That's what I think.
That's beautifully put. So essentially, we are saying that storytelling is a continuum, and there is no beginning or end.
Yeah.
in this whole business, in this whole sphere of myths. And one of the things that I just wanted to say is, we were doing a project on adolescence and growing up and gender. We wanted to look at this whole business of growing up in a country like India, which essentially lives in many centuries, and growing up, and how difficult it is for adolescent boys and girls. And it's exactly what all three of you have referred to. We took the concept of the Lakshman Rekha, we called it the force field, and that was the overarching insight for the entire project, on the basis of which we did a 78 episode television drama called Adha Full. 3 teen detectives growing up in a small town called Badlipur, and how they're constantly negotiating and acting and becoming role models in stepping out of that Lakshman Rekha. So imagine, we have grown up reading about the Lakshman Rekha, watching things about the Lakshman Rekha. That's the crux of the story of Ramayana. And that morphed into the insight that actually inspired and informed an entire transmedia project. So even when we did a mobile app, it was the force field, a mobile game for adolescents. It was the force field that inspired the concept of the mobile game. So it's really amorphous. There are no boundaries of where, there is no boundary of where past stops and the present takes over. It's just, it's fluid. I think that is, and I think that's the essence of this panel, is it not? Yeah, it's actually a beautifully conceived session. So my next question, and we'll begin with Shilpa. Shilpa, is that okay? So
Yes.
Since we were talking about Parashuram and Yalamma, what has been your experience in nurturing the tradition of the Yogathis or the Yalamma performance? How has the community responded to your intervention? And this community, the Jogathi community, what do they see their role as? Like, in Hindi, they say, Aaj ke Tarikh mein, sitting now in the 21st century, what do they see their role as storytellers of an old myth? And before you start answering, Shilpa, if you could just describe your project in one line, because not everybody would know about this.
It's it'd be difficult for me to explain it in one line, but Urban Folk Project as a collective came about because I noticed there's a lot of folk knowledge systems that need, if not preserving, some sort of continuity. Because preserving makes us feel like saviors. So it's just about figuring out different people who are working with folk mediums, folk artists, people who are researchers, to come together and kind of think about where we are going, in terms of how much we take our cultures that are rooted to the land, cultures that are rooted to spirits, myths, and then how does it belong now? So it's Urban Folk Project came about for that. I'll start answering by with what the Jogathis see themselves as now. Firstly, there are 3 or 4 Jogathi families I got in touch with for this project.
Who are the Jogathis?
The Jogathis, there are 3 kinds of disciples of Yalamma. Jogammas, who are Devadasis, who are women. There are Jogathis, who are transgender women, who are also disciples, and Jogappas are usually either cross-dressers or male devotees of Yalamma.
Okay. And Yalamma is?
And Yalamma is Renuka Yalamma. Yalamma is a version of Renuka who is celebrated, who is adhered to in Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, and Maharashtra. The myth of Renuka Yalamma is all across the nation. Like you see it from Kashmir to Sri Lanka, you have Renuka temples all over. But then the myth kind of changes every 20, 30 kilometers. And you can kind of say that this region, Renuka is Renuka Yalamma. Right. The myth kind of has similar DNA here and there, and hence this region we follow Renuka Yalamma. And Renuka Yalamma's disciples are many. A lot of Devadasis were associated to Yalamma. There was a long tradition of Shruti and Chaudki, these rare instruments that were played for this deity. So the Devadasis sat down and played like courtesans, but with these instruments and songs of Yalamma and what she stood for. In some versions, she's like this magical sorceress. And in some, she's like this Abala Nari, in love with her husband, in love with her son, and she can't do anything beyond. So there are different variations of her. And Jogatis, as transgender women, they do two things. One, they busk in the name of Yalama. And two, they play these instruments and dance with the pot. A lot of cultures across Deccan, I'm sure Nalini will know of a few as well, like Karagatam and Bonalu. They have the female fertility symbol, the pot, in the name of a goddess on their head, and they do some theatrics with it. They jump around and they bounce and they make it spill and then they balance it back on. They do some funky things. But today, as of now, the Jogatis don't have any way of earning but to be just like regular marginalized trans people prostituting themselves on the street. There are only very few temples that have that much of footfall that can pay for dancing every day at the temple. And there are only those many years that you can do that as a Jogati. You can't dance all your life. You will have to figure out how you form a family. Who's the matriarch? Is she a guru or is she just a mother? And if she is a guru, what is she passing on to you? Where will you fall in that hierarchy? How will you take on the tradition? So there are all these complications, and I was scared if I walked into this space that they would not accept me. And it happened in some places where they would be like, you're not a Devdasi, you're not a transgender woman, why do you want to pick up these songs? So my only comeback to that usually was, there are no new Devdasis. It's illegal. You can't have women turn up in this tradition against their will, or even willingly. I don't think you can become a Devdasi. And Jogatis, young trans people, are finding different ways of belonging to the larger queer community. And the Jogatis are, as a family structure, are failing, just like every other family structure. So hence I said, okay, teach me so I can find you new students. That's how I began, actually. That really worked. I said, if you teach me, I will sit in the park every day and teach these songs. I won't take any money from anybody. And when they like to pick up the instruments, they will have you as teachers. I think that was a step that helped me kind of put my foot in. And then we just came back from her house. We did a fundraiser for her. She wanted to build a house, and we did a keto fundraiser. She got 5 lakhs. So we went and partied in our house, and all the girls came and we made chicken, and so now I feel like a family. Some of them call me auntie, some of them call me akka, that's elder sister. So they have kind of fit me informally in their family. And now if I want to stay in the family, I too have rules. I can't work with them separately. I have to work with the whole family. I can't say, oh, I really have a new favorite now, so let me come in. I can't do that. So there are certain rules that you have to adhere to, and you have to walk in, and you have to make them feel comfortable. I have felt very guilty, in the beginning, I had this notion that if I got them bigger audience and better shows, it would sustain them. I'm not really sure if that really works that way, because getting them shows and putting them in the city where they were not comfortable was, again, strange. I used to book them in a hotel, and this one hotel guy said, I can't let them in because they're trans people. I won't have them in my hotel. And then I thought, no, I actually don't want them to go anywhere. I just want them to be able to feel comfortable in the space they perform. So my idea of coming here to Gulbarga and trying to start a space as well is, I want them to feel as comfortable as I feel in their house, in my house. And that house has a courtyard to fit probably 100 people. Their courtyard fits 4 people. And it's just that simple concept. I said, I'll build a forest and I'll make a house where my teachers can feel at home, and I will start slow.
Right.
That's what I am.
Yeah. So it's really about respect, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is.
Right.
And it's really one-on-one.
Yes.
It's not all the families that I contacted that kept in touch with me.
Right.
Not all of them accepted that kind of, yeah.
Right. That's lovely. Vikram, I wanted to ask you that when you retell the Mahabharata stories today, what are the ways in which you improvise? And so one is improvisation. What do you think is the impact of these changes on the audience? And so improvisation changes on the audience. It's a little complicated, this question. do you also see the process of storytelling as one that writes the story as it is being told? So, it comes back to improvisation. And if so, how would you think that a story like the Mahabharata or the Ramayana was written by one or a set of authors, or by the authors and the bards that told them? So basically, I want you to talk about your process of storytelling, and to the degree to which you improvise, and how does it affect the audience, and also to just reflect back and compare that, perhaps it's audacious, this question, to perhaps the process in which the stories were originally written. Does that make sense to you, for you, Vikram?
Okay. So before I start, I should say I am part of the small world of Shilpa's Kavan Park family. So she's been my teacher in many ways. From there to go into, so for me, I look at the Mahabharata, Ramayana, and the other tales that I tell in the genre of folklore. And because I don't believe they were written as myths, they were written as, the way that we look at it today, they were just stories. And a lot of stories, I tell a lot of folk, classical stories, which is myths, folk tales, and heritage stories, which come under a genre of which has been documented. But the problem with documenting these is they're dead bodies in books. I mean, unless I take the folk tale out, or the tales out, and it comes into the artistic realm, there is no life to it. So I look at it as giving life to a lot of heritage of ours, which is lying in books in some cupboard. The first way I look at it when I look at that particular episode or the story or the folk tale. And the second is, no one person wrote it. I strongly believe that it is one of the highest crowdsourced story in the world. I mean, what we call today crowdsourcing is, this country has done it through the Mahabharata, the Panchatantra. I mean, I've been working on the Panchatantra from a textual point of view, saying it is not for children. None of these stories are for children. I mean, they have had psychology, sexuality, sensuality, spirituality, all ingrained in these stories, which is for the audience to take in. I mean, not to be told what to take in. The moment we are telling what to take in, there is a problem there. And so when I let's say look at the simple story of even Bakasura. The Bakasura story is a huge phenomenon in Kuthu, the Terukuthu form of Tamil Nadu, where the entire village takes part in the ceremony. When Kunti in the story makes a food, in the village, the entire village cooks food for Bhima to take it to Bakasura, which is not in the written text. So
right.
you need to look at this country. I mean, I look at the larger realm of this country as a boundary where this Mahabharata, Ramayana, Panchatantra even exists today. I mean, we can never find this. We should never find this boundary. I hope we should never find a boundary to these stories. The moment you see the same story in the Himalayas lies in the story of Hidimbi's son Bhima, whereas in Kanchipuram, where it is Kut, it is Draupadi's, because Draupadi Amman is a temple around which this entire Bakasura episode happens, where it is Draupadi's husband Bhima. Both the stories for me, and my journey is continuous. It's not a destination, it's a journey. So in that way, that's how I look at every story, to say that how many variations. And 2020, what does the story do in 2020? Why should I say somebody cooked food and somebody took it to Bakasura, whereas today we have food problems, right?
Right.
We're talking about, so politics is very ingrained part of folklore.
Right.
And unless as a performer, and artists are political in that way. I mean, we have to bring in contemporary, we bring in questioning. I'm saying, and the best thing with storyteller, I'm not a historian, I'm not I'm saying a writer, I'm confusing the audience. I'm shaking and leaving.
You're disrupting.
That's all. And I run away.
Right.
And
right.
that's how I look at these stories. I mean, because beautiful tales, if you look at it and remove the bhakti perspective of it, just look at it purely as literature, or literature this country goes.
Right. I hope lots of people who actually are in the profession of creating communication are listening, tuning in and listening to what you all have to say. I got so many gems from, the answers. One is that you're saying that the story is almost like a stimulus, right? And you expect the audience to respond and react and recreate in a certain way. And what you also said is basically what has become a very, very common phrase in the world of content making, which is user generated content. You've also made a point about the personal being the political, which is true of artists, from times immemorial. And the other thing that you have said, which is exciting me, is basically I'm thinking of Shakespeare and his famous line, all the world's a stage. So depending on where the stage is, whether it's in Kanchipuram or whether it's up in the mountains, is how the story gets played out. So really fantastic, wonderful, wonderful observations. I wanted to go to, thank you. I wanted to go to Nalini next. And Nalini, when you documented the different traditions in your book, what were the most striking discoveries? I mean, every writer, every artist sets out with a particular vision, but in the process of creation, you do make discoveries, right? That's what the artistic process is all about. So what are the striking discoveries you made about the relationship between performers and tellers and the stories themselves? And how did you see, when you were writing the book, how did you see the story shape the art and the community that held it sacred? Because I kind of agree that, when people were writing these stories, they didn't think they were writing myths. But over time, many of these stories have acquired a sacred dimension. So, yeah. So one is the relationship between performers and tellers and the stories themselves. And how did you see the story shape the art and the community for whom it would have been sacred?
Okay, so I think first of all, for me, it was when I began work on the book, it was just these 4 simple words: storytelling traditions of India. That is all I had in my head. But only once I started researching, I realized what a big mess I had got myself into, because it's a never ending thing. There is no way I could have documented all of it. So I was just being foolishly over ambitious. And that's when I thought, okay, then the best way to do this is through representation. Now, how do you do representation also? Because how do you explain to somebody, even if my readers are children, why I have picked particular tradition over another tradition? So I think the idea that drove me was that, okay, let's try and give as much representation as possible. I did not want to leave out any of the tales that were told even in union territories, and especially in the Northeast, because these are regions of our country that usually get left out, unfortunately, either purposely or not. That's another story altogether. But so for me, that was a whole learning process. And in my book, the thing is, I've started with Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and then I have connected each chapter or state or region and the tradition. So it's layers of storytelling to the next. It was very difficult, but it helped me understand how, if you really look, you will find these connections.
Right.
So again, I'm just going, and since you were talking about art and communities, again, I'll just share a few images from the book with you to explain some of these points. One second. Yeah, okay. Okay, so again, Dastan Goi, oral storytelling tradition that was very popular in the 1900s. And I think this is one of the pre-partition traditions that somehow got lost. History played a role, eventually freedom movement happened, but it definitely found a way back because there were storytellers like Shilpa, Vikram, and a lot of people who wanted to revive it, and along that they also revived the language in which these tales were told, that is Urdu. So that is one thing. Second thing is, when something is revived, or if traditions find or move ahead with generations, they either become a reflection of the society itself, or they tend to absorb the very ethos of that particular contemporary society. So I think somewhere a lot of traditions have started doing that. So there is Sang from Haryana, which was primarily a male-oriented tradition, but nowadays, women have also found some space on the stage. So like you can see here also in Dastangoy, nowadays we have female Dastangos. I think since we were also talking about thresholds, somewhere these thresholds are also being crossed over by new age storytellers. And it's not just about new age storytellers, I think it's also about communities themselves, because they are realizing a lot of things and they want to get those messages out loud and clear to today's audiences. So Shilpa mentioned Theyyam from Kerala. So again, we know that in India especially, there are a lot of marginalized communities who are not allowed into places of worship. But with Theyyam, the whole power equation changes, because a particular marginalized community is they become the embodiment of the folk gods themselves. So they are the divine beings, so what is the message that is coming across? The narrative itself has changed. And I think somewhere that is where the purpose of storytelling is also important when it comes to community knowledge, or passing on a new belief system and social change, like Vikram was saying. The next thing that I found was, since you were also talking about performance, there are a lot of silent traditions or silent stories, and you wouldn't really think of these as stories. Now these are everyday things. So what you see here on the screen is basically the weaving song or the weaving tradition of the Sumi Nagas, the tribe from Nagaland. It's one of the many tribes actually, and it's a very simple process. All of them, the women sit together, and each one is designated with a separate part of the entire chore. So one is cleaning, one is weaving, one is spinning. So it's a very community oriented it's not really an occupation but activity in that sense. And the previous generation sings these songs so that the next generation learns both the tradition and the whole process of making cloth from cotton. But what has happened is, even though there is no performance inbuilt as such in this tradition, because it needs to be documented, these are dying forms, and possibly the new age youngsters, they are not really following these traditions, plus it's also like a window to the world. All these reasons have made it important for the tribe to perform this song and the activity during festivals such as the Hornbill Festival. So it's something that didn't really require performance, but the moment you have an audience, it automatically becomes a performance. And on the other hand, you obviously have traditions such as Manipuri Ras Leela. It obviously comes from Manipur, which right from concept stage is seeped in performance. So again, this belongs to just one man's dream. It's not even something tangible like the weaving process or something. It's just about this king called Bhagyachandra, Manipuri king, 18th century king. In his dream, Krishna came and said, okay, I want you to build a temple at so and so place, and you perform the Manipuri Ras Leela there. And it's why this particular story is strange, because it's not just about what had to be done where, it was also about how it had to be done. So Bhagyachandra saw very clearly in his dream all the hand movements, the leg movements, the entire style of dancing, and he also saw costume related elements. That's the whole legend. So he knew that, the veil had to be made of a particular kind of net, and then there was silk, skirts and velvet blouse, and then these tassels, and then you have this fan, and then you have the more punk, because of course it's Krishna, and he wears the more punk. So somewhere a lot of these are interrelated, and they form the identity of these communities. So, and I was also talking to you about professions earlier. So a lot of professions, so for example, in Chhattisgarh, there is this community the Bastar region, so the community over there, they are ironsmiths by profession. But what has happened is, apart from just making, latches and locks and all kinds of utility items, from scrap iron, they started sculpting forms of their folk gods and started telling their own community's tales. So somewhere it's not just about a respect for the environment, making sure their community stories live on, but I think it's also about their belief that the divine resides in even metal like iron or scrap iron for that matter. Yeah.
Right. Well, that's really so interesting. That really is interesting, and it's really the Manipur story made me think of whether the king actually wanted to do something and kind of pretended that he had had a dream, because he would be a very good subject for Freud to be thinking of the material of the whale. Mind-boggling. We'll get on to the, and I found I thought that the point you made, Nalini, about how sometimes storytelling is not conscious, and the Naga example that you gave,
Yeah.
that how in everyday activities stories are continuously being told. And that brings me to this observation that today, when you look at a world that's absolutely ridden and rife with misinformation, what is happening? I'm not trying to glorify obviously misinformation and disinformation, but basically our psyche and media and politics and happenings all over the world are being controlled by people who are making up stories. So they, in these years, beginning with the time when all this became very popular, we see how storytelling is being used for not for good, right? So that is the power of stories, and which is why today all over the world you'll have conferences and seminars on the power of storytelling. And we know the power of storytelling, where we are actually using storytelling in a very conscious manner to change behavior, to change the way people think, also to change social norms. And that kind of is a nice segue, I think, to my next question. I wanted you people to explore, and it's the same question for all three of you, that how can we get old stories to speak to a contemporary audience? I think in a way the answer is quite obvious or self-evident, but you guys are expert, storytellers, so it would be really nice to hear from you. And because essentially all three of you are handling folk traditions, you're people who are preserving an endangered tradition, retelling stories, old stories, to a new audience. What does it take for you to do this? And for Nalini in particular, how have the arts and traditions adapted to the new ages? So shall we begin with Nalini then? So it's basically about old stories for contemporary audiences and in the retelling. And how do you think, Nalini, arts and traditions have adapted to this time?
Okay, so I think before I talk about what I could do, or what any of us could do to help the traditions live on, I think we should definitely give enough credit to the storytellers themselves. A lot of them, they are very upset because there has been disinterest in the traditions because of new age media, so be it social media or television or animation, even though somewhere I think people don't realize that these are from the technologies from where the others have evolved. So that is one thing that has always been on the minds of a lot of traditional storytellers. The second thing is also that it is not really a lucrative occupation anymore. So they are finding new ways to make ends meet and not let go of these storytelling traditions. Again, I would like to share a few examples, and I'll just share the screen 1 second. Right, so okay, So, okay, so what you can see here is a form, an art form called Pattachitra, again from Odisha. It has a deep connection with the whole legend of Jagannath of Puri. One of the presiding deities in the state. And a lot, I think many of these storytellers have realized that, okay, those who are interested in the stories will continue, purchasing the actual put or the entire story narratives from them. But a lot of the others are not really keen, or they find it expensive and they cannot purchase it. So what they have started doing is transforming the tradition into products, and so you suddenly see Jagannath's face on a tea kettle or something like that, and then there is a jewelry trinket box or these wall plates and stuff like that. It may have or may not have any significance as such, but at least the art form lives on. What happens to the stories is,
Oh,
again, yeah, you know that exactly. So that is one thing. And again, a lot of traditional storytellers are not very keen on putting their art on fabric, because they feel, array, if we'll put it on t-shirt, people are going to wring it and wash it. How can we put something that is so sacred to us, how can we let it undergo this kind of treatment? So for them, that is important. I think, again, as purchasers or people who are on the other end, they don't realize that the sanctity has to be maintained at all times. But despite that, in West Bengal, the Santals have done a decently good job. So what you can see here is that it's obviously a dupatta, but they have depicted their dance, their music and dance. It's a very important part of their life, because they undergo a lot of social oppression, and music and dance is one of the ways they feel happy. So this is, this is their story. They're telling it to you. You may not know about it, but they are doing their job. And at the same time, they are not shying away from also depicting mythological stories. It's not that they don't think these are sacred. Of course, they are very sacred to them, but I think somewhere they feel, along with the art, the stories have to live on, and this is the only way to do it. I think from all the research that I did, the Patuas of West Bengal were the only people who told me that every weekend they sit their children down and conduct storytelling classes. So right from how to think up an idea, to how to mix color, to how to paint, how to unfurl the scroll and narrate, how to, they write their own songs, they compose their own songs. It's just splendid. So I think what Shilpa was talking about, storytelling schools, if all of them could do that, that would be a great way of continuing a lot of these traditions. Again, there are a few who have managed to bridge the whole gap between the ancient traditions and contemporary relevance. So this is from this year's one of the pandals from Kolkata. I think all of us know the mythological significance, but I think anyone who does not know the mythological significance will also understand or relate to this, because it's a very very relevant to our times. So that is one thing. Then in Rajasthan, there is this tradition of the story box. It's a wooden box which has multiple doors, and it opens up, and then you have another storyteller sing the tales. So this is called Kavad Katha. And this particular kavad maker, he's obviously a carpenter by profession, he realized that he could use the concept of the story box as a teaching aid. And so he's designed something called the school kavad, where he has the alphabet and he has drawn and written words and stuff, and he's not letting go of his cultural side also. So he's very happily depicted Saraswati right in the center. Saraswati is the goddess of knowledge. And so they are holding on to traditions, they're trying to bridge the gap. How many of them will be able to do it is again uncertain. This is Phat painting, again from Rajasthan. Why have I shown this image? Because it is a sacred textile shrine, portable shrine, although it is 20-25 feet long and around 5-6 feet broad. How are the Phat artists doing this? Again, not too many storytellers around to continue singing these tales. but the artists are making sure that the tales survive. So nobody is going to buy a 20 by 5 foot sacred shrine, because they are going to wonder and say, itna bada ghar kahan pe hai? Where do I have such, wall space, or the luxury of this kind of wall space? Where will I put this up? So what they have been doing is they have been creating episodes onto these, single panel kind of folios. They are not letting go of the tradition. And I think this is something that you would know, Radharani. They are also using it for social messaging. So something like this, although it's a completely pictorial art form, they have kind of started using text sometimes, because maybe they feel, okay, if the images are not enough, because the storyteller is no longer a part of the activity, maybe they feel they should include text. So again, so these are the ways in which I feel the community is trying to do these things. Then again, if it comes to me, I am doing my best as far as writing about them and documentation goes. I always try and purchase whatever I can, within my financial limits. But I think I understand what Shilpa says, because a lot of them are not very comfortable with, because there's a moral dilemma. What happens is they want the tradition to live, so they want to teach outsiders, but at the same time they are very aware that outsiders can take advantage and make it their profession or primary occupation, and they get left out again all over again. So I think these are the different ways in which they have been innovating and experimenting. I am just hoping to bring these stories to the fore whenever and wherever I get a chance.
Right. Thank you. Thanks, Nalini. Vikram, what do you think? How do we get old stories to speak to a contemporary audience?
So audio visual. So visual has a certain luxury because it is sitting on a certain space. So the space, like how Nalini was saying, the space where it's at moved from maybe wood to a dupatta. Whereas in oral, there is a huge line between the privileged and the traditional artist. The contemporary artists have the luxury of language. And we are playing a lot with English being the connecting language. And storytellers have always been story travelers. So taking it and connecting. So what over time, let's say Vikram Betal, I'm taking an example of Vikram Betal's story, which human emotion has always been the same. I'm thinking we all have been feeling from many generations to even now, the emotions are still the same. What it's changed is the technology with which we have that emotion. So, right. Like this beautiful story of Vikram Betal, where there is a painting that...
Could you just do something for us, just for a minute?
So once upon a time, there was this minister who came to Vikram Aditya, Raja Vikram Aditya. You see, my name is Vikram, but I'm not the Betal. And Vikram Aditya was sitting and he was asking what is wrong. And the minister said, Raja, there's a painter who is crying. You see, an artist shouldn't cry in this country, thought Raja Vikramaditya. That's why he's Raja Vikramaditya. And Raja Vikramaditya went to the painter and he saw the painting, and the painting was like this. Will you buy the painting? And Raja Vikramaditya looked at the painting again, and everybody else said, Raja, this painting is not... But Raja Vikramaditya bought the painting. He bought the painting, got it back, and he didn't keep it in his hall, he didn't keep it in his kitchen, he kept it in his bedroom, which means every time he woke up, he's going to see this. And he woke up to that image every day. And every day he woke up, one day, something went away from his body. And he looked at it, and it was the goddess of wealth. How many of you want money in life?
All of us.
But Raja Vikramaditya looked at her and smiled. And she said, what's wrong with you? Why did you buy this painting? You don't know the value of money. He said, I know the value of the artist. And after a few days, again something went away. And this was the goddess of knowledge. How many of you are okay with knowledge going away? But Raja Vikramaditya said, and she said, what's wrong with you? Don't you use your buddhi to buy this painting? He said, I connected to the artist. And after a few days, again something went away. And this was the goddess of willpower, that gut feeling that you have towards something. And she went away. And she said, I mean, money, okay, knowledge, okay, but that something inside didn't tell you about this painting. What is this painting doing in a bedroom? And she went away. And he said, it's okay. And Raja Vikramaditya from triple XL became small size. And he was sitting there. And one day, after a few days, something again went. And she was going away. And Raja Vikramaditya said, stop. And she looked and asked, why are you stopping me? You didn't stop money. You didn't stop knowledge. You didn't stop that Shakti. But why me? And Raja said, you see, money, if I lose, I'll get back. Knowledge, if I lose, I'll get back. And this other, the power also I'll get back. But you are dhairya, confidence. If I lose you, I can't get them back. I can't buy you, but I can't lose you. And she came back. When she came, dhairya came back, dhana came back, shakti came back, jnana came back. And this story, it's an old story. And today, if I have to tell it in a 1950s version, it doesn't connect to a teenager. I can tell the same story to a teenager, to a 60 who has an LIC 3-month, every month EMI, who's paying and having 3 BHK apartment. The story is the same, but how do you connect to your audience?
Right.
That's where the adaptation is. An artist who have adapted and changed have stood, because many arts have gone away in this country as much as we talk about existing art forms. And this is what somebody whom I respect a lot said, if you are not in the moment, in the present, you're not relevant.
Yeah.
And that is where adapting, adopting, and transferring.
Right.
Story is the same, old story, new bottle.
You know, one of the BBC values, editorial values, that sits at the base of everything we do, whether it's a strategy, whether it's audience segmentation, is communities are at the heart of everything we do. So what you've essentially said, Vikram, is that if you don't put your audience at the center, your story will become less powerful, right? That's
and the same story, if you tell it in Bengal and in Kerala, it cannot be the same.
Right.
It has to evolve with the aesthetic, and that's my duty also. I'm saying, as an artist, I have to
absolutely
be there.
Right. So you're serving an audience, and
storytellers have always done that, and storytellers break the fourth wall. So I break the fourth wall. I have a fifth wall where the audience comes into my space.
Yes.
And that's very, very, I mean, that's the form that I'm trying to do, where the audience is in the story. You're not outside, you're inside. Because you are the story I'm telling you to.
Right. Because the insights and the emotions are universal and timeless. You have to keep adapting. Yeah, that's really wonderful. Thank you for saying that. That's so important. That's just at the heart of the storytelling business. Shilpa, what is your take on this?
I've struggled with this because I've been telling Yalama's story. We've done more than 70 shows of her myth, and we do it in about an hour's time. Hour and a half, we can even take 2 hours. But usually we're not in a time where people call you for a festival and say, I'll give you 2 hours. They'll be like, half an hour, 15 minutes. Can you do something in 10 minutes? So we were living in a time where attention span, how we program, it's for the short, not for the long. So that is one of the things that I've struggled with, is the way we say it. We're always trying to summarize. We're always trying to truncate. Maybe it is bringing new audience to this story, but I don't know if it does justice to the form. And I don't know if as an artist who is also a part of this continuum of this art form, I can actually look beyond it and observe and react on it. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So I feel like when I look back on what Veena Pani Chavla did when she started Adi Shakti in Pondicherry, she is a Punjabi woman who fell in love with Kudiyattam and then worked with Kudiyattam, brought it over to Pondicherry, worked with Kalaripayattu, and now she probably didn't help Kudiyattam, but she's helped revive a new kind of understanding of that form. There's a new language that she developed so that she'd be able to converse more comfortably. She could not have morphed in, probably she could have, Probably she could have become a Kudiyattam dancer herself, but she chose to be somewhere in the middle. And that has got a new kind of audience. Kudiyattam probably doesn't need an international audience. Maybe it doesn't, you know. But she had this vision of connecting to a certain kind of audience. I studied filmmaking in Australia, and I chose not to be a filmmaker in Australia because I didn't know how much an outsider could be in a directorial or a writing position. Even as an actor, I didn't know if there would be enough brown parts for me to go and fit in. So I just felt like somewhere as a narrator, you need to build so much context sometimes. I struggle to try and root Yellamanata in this in with Yellama and the spiritual context and the community context, because that is, again, like I said, it's a one-on-one thing that I have to build. So quite often for me as an artist, I think it has really helped to speak in the language that I think in, and not try and adapt to the language that it is that my teachers speak in. I think that helped to get a new kind of audience. If not, you know, I don't know if I've enlarged the audience as such. The other thing is the engagement. Like Vikram said, it's about trying to. I do not like doing things online because I'm not able to gaze into my audience eyes and see what reaction I'm getting. I get nervous. I'm like, I'm a little full of myself, so I can look at myself and do all of that. But beyond that, where is that spirit that I get in a live space where there is audience, there are children laughing, there is one uncle really upset with what I'm saying. I want that space where the disruption, where the laugh, like even how Nalini said, we cannot control where it goes. Jagannath might land up on a tea kettle, but ultimately, if you are someone who fell in love with that aspect of the art form, as an artist, it's your duty to give your time and commitment to that. So that's where I am, trying to figure out how much commitment I want to give Yellama's story. Now I have found another story. I'm like, if this took me 3 years, how many years will that take me? How many years do I have to invest in yet another story? Now I have found that Yellama has 5 sisters who all got married to Jamadagni and whose sons are Parshurama. This I found out yesterday, and it blew my mind. I'm like, now where am I going to find these stories? How am I going to weave them in? How, within the space that I'm trying to create, am I going to allow this transference to happen with love and acceptance, both from the community and new artists to come? That's a real challenge, but that's where I am.
You guys are all very intrepid. You're all brave and you're doing just some wonderful things. I had 3 very pointed questions, and I just wanted to, I think it'll kind of, these questions might be able to summarize what we've been talking about in the last 45 minutes. So my first question, and any of you can answer it, because is, given the 2 sides of the coin, purity and adaptability, as a storyteller of myths, of folk traditions, what would you like to let go of in order to continue? So how does your balance tilt? So who would like to take that?
I'll go.
Yeah.
I don't believe actually stories are pure. I've not found the original of any story. I feel like every story I find is an original, right? So I definitely give up on the purity side of it. If it is adaptable, if I'm able to get a 3-year-old and a 60-year-old relate to the story I'm saying, that's where it is. I'm able to adapt it to a large, varied kind of audience. I'm like, yeah, I've struck gold. This is the story.
Right. Thank you. As a lover of stories, as a storyteller, what is the one, and make it specific, what is the one thing that you want to carry on doing what you are? One specific wish. I wish I could, or I wish there was. And who would like to take that, Vikram or Nalini?
I wish people don't think of originals. There is no original in this world. I mean, so that's absorb and take it.
Right, right. And so Nalini remains. So Nalini, my third question is that in 5 years' time, where do you see this universe of stories? Because you see, in the last 8 or 9 months, the world has undergone a huge change. So, for example, there's a whole discussion to be had about, how COVID would have affected storytelling, performances and art forms. We know this has really changed the way the world, this universe has lived for the last however many thousands of years. So in 5 years' time, looking into a crystal ball, what do you think will happen to this whole business of storytelling through various forms? Just a line, please. We don't have time for it, unfortunately.
Yeah, obviously, I think it will undergo a lot of change. We have spoken about a sudden digital interface, and there is no connection with the audience. But I think every generation would have had its own set of, historical or political events that would have brought about some change in that particular tradition or any of the traditions for that matter. So I don't think this is any kind of a full stop. Maybe it's a comma or a semicolon, but it will continue. Maybe the narratives again will change. I think, yeah, the medium will also I think I see that also undergoing change. But yeah, as far as traditional storytellers are concerned, if there are more people like Vikram, Shilpa who are, taking up their cause, I do see hope. So, yeah.
Thank you. So I just wanted to sum up. You guys have just been so wonderful. I've learned so much from this session, and it fills me with wonder at what you guys are doing, what all of you are doing. And there's just one thing that I'd like to say to the audience, our audience for this session, is that I hope that you will spread the word of these wonderful things happening. I hope it reinforces in your minds and hearts that stories are important. They're important for our existence, and they fuel our imagination, they fuel our beliefs, whether they're personal, whether they're political, whether they're socio-economic. So continue telling stories, all three of you, continue bringing to us how stories are being told, and let's just end this session by saying that none of us, neither not any of us on this panel, or nor the people who have tuned in to this panel, can really imagine an existence without stories. Right. Stories are like O2, oxygen. If there were no stories, I think the world would have just wilted and perished. So 3 cheers for stories, storytellers, storytelling, and I hope we can have MythoLogical next year again. And right. I wish you all the very, very best.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for being on the panel.